right here. And let's see, Loisos, you want to go ahead and give an introduction for Jose Solis-Padilla, who's going to be talking about the Americas update, and then I put it right here.
Thank you, Dr. Quiñones. It's my honor to introduce Jose Solis-Padilla as our keynote speaker today. Mr. Padilla serves as the Executive Director of Mayo Clinic, and his lecture today will focus on collaboration being the future of competition. So he studied accounting and finance at UNAM in Mexico and then completed an MBA at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. He then assumed multiple key roles such as Director of Finance and Lead International Liaison before becoming Director of Global Services at Johns Hopkins. In 2021, he assumed the position of Senior Administrator in International Business Development here at Mayo Clinic before becoming Executive Director at the International Administration Department. Below, you can see some of the multiple articles in press about the important work and liaisons Mr. Padilla has helped build over the years. And in the next slide, we have the photo of this plaque that we have prepared for you to extend our gratitude for being here with us today. So thank you again for joining us. And without further ado, the future of competition is collaboration. Thank you.
And I just want to say at a personal level, I'm going to stop sharing this right here. Over the years, I got to work with Jose, when we first came together back towards the end of 2016, and we left Johns Hopkins here to the Mayo Clinic with a dream. At the time, our footprint in Latin America was a small footprint. I mean, of course, Mayo Clinic is known around the world, but over the last decade in Latin America, I would say that Johns Hopkins had become the preferred provider for Latin American patients. But over the last 5 years, right before the pandemic, we were able to very strategically, and thanks to the vision of Jose and of course the international office and a lot of the work that had happened already here in Mayo, we were able to switch that. And Jose has been a tremendous leader. I enjoy traveling with him. We have done so many things together over the years and more to come. So Jose, I'm very proud of you, everything that you have done with your family, not only your personal family, but also the international family. And we're excited to hear about the tremendous amount of growth that is happening around the world. Also, for disclosure, Jose serves in the board of Mission Brain. He's been active way before we came to the Mayo Clinic. Everybody knows that the Mission Brain began about 6 or 7 years before, actually a decade before we even came to the Mayo Clinic. So congratulations, Jose. We're looking forward to your presentation. Take it away, please.
Thank you. And as always, a pleasure to work with this department, with you, Dr. Q. As you mentioned, a few years ago, we embarked on a dream. And I think the dream is growing, continues to be shaped by all of us. And today, I am honored to present an update on behalf of a very, very large team. I think across the years here at Mayo, we have been able to bring together colleagues from multiple locations, from multiple departments, to move towards a single vision. And today I'm here representing all of them. My disclosures, as you mentioned, I serve as a board member in Mission Brain, which is doing exciting work. And I most recently participated in the hackathon, which was quite an amazing experience. I think I learned more than what I could provide to the participants. But this reminded me of the flexibility that we have to have when we do work in medicine and when we do work internationally. Looking at the students, seeing one problem from multiple perspectives really, really challenged my intellectual curiosity to continue to explore and continue to serve. As you mentioned, the last 5 years have been amazing. When we joined Mayo in 2006, we came and really our job was to come and learn and interpret what could be done differently to help Mayo Clinic grow internationally. And we needed to be very targeted. So, of course, this picture is prior to the pandemic. I had less gray hair, and there was a lot of people gathered in Keynote auditorium. But I think a lot of things have changed. But what has not changed is that this continues to be an amazing opportunity for us to continue targeting. I think prior to the pandemic, we learned very, very important things about how the world and our environment was going to change. This is a slide that summarizes what Mayo Clinic went through their exercise of strategic planning. And prior to the pandemic, we wanted to understand how can we do accurate diagnosis anywhere. I think prior to the pandemic, we were very, very fixed to the mindset of everything that happens within Mayo Clinic should happen in person. We also knew that the second trend that we were going to face was more consumerism and empowering patients. So I think that was very, very important for us to consider. Third, virtual interactions. We learned through the pandemic from one day to the next that we couldn't see any patients and that we needed to start seeing them virtually. And our numbers, I think, were very, very aggressive, that we went from almost no virtual interactions to millions. What continues to be, I think, reimagined is how we're going to collaborate with the world. Research education needs to continue. I think we're doing a lot in the US. We are expanding internationally, but more needs to be done because I think this is a bi-directional way of learning. And last, innovation. I think innovation has to be at the forefront of everything that we do because we know that all business models, are becoming obsolete. So we cannot only rely as generating revenue by seeing patients. There has to be a lot more. There has to be innovation to create new cures. We have to connect with the world and transform what we're doing. And of course, diversify our sources of revenue as an organization to continue leading the charge of medicine. So I have the privilege to serve in the Americas. As Dr. Q mentioned, this is work that I've done for the last 20 years. I have been deliberate about this because early in my career, I learned one thing, that emerging economies, low and middle income countries, were going to lead innovation and global business. And this is something that 20 years ago was seen as potentially just idealistic, but today we are seeing developments in India, developments in Brazil, developments in other countries that are very competitive. And if you were to summarize my master's degree in global business, this is the slide that you need to take home. There are different ways to do global business. In the 19th century, it was all about colonization. So we know the key players there, the UK, Spain, Portugal. In the 20th century, it was all about capitalism. And we knew that the US, Europe, and Japan were very, very important. In fact, some of the principles of quality today are applied in medicine because, we learned that the Toyota model was very good. So, this redundancy, this engineer model, which is one of the principles that the Mayo Clinic uses. But 21st century, this is all about the future of competition globally. We have to collaborate, we have to learn, because there is one thing that we cannot take away from people, which is education and their intellectual curiosity, and that happens beyond borders, beyond walls. And this is the rise of emerging economies. We have people from Mexico in this department that is very brilliant, people from Italy, people from India. I think this is where the competition, it is going to shape and is going to favor who is doing more internationally in a very deliberate way. Now, for Mayo Clinic, we have divided the world in 3 big corridors. We know that those corridors are different, so we need to learn about them. And of course, there are very specific ways to go about this. We have to understand their ability to pay, their economic environment, the digital readiness, and many other factors. But we also have to understand what Mayo Clinic can do there. And number one, we know that patients will continue to be our core activity, so we will have to continue to be deliberate about, if we're interacting with the world, we have to be deliberate about serving the world in a different way, which means those patients have different needs than domestic patients. We also know that we need to elevate our brand. It is not only about protecting it, we have to elevate it. And that will happen through collaboration. And third, in-market presence. We cannot be a global company if we don't have a presence outside of the United States. So those were three key principles that are driving our efforts. And for that, in the Americas, we recognize that international, as we say in a very colloquial way, is the land of ambiguity and lack of structure. If we were to put it in a more academic or structured way, we will say this is an unstructured environment that we have to find ways to approach for this to be reasonable, for this to be effective. So we developed this aspiration statement that really captures our aims, which is drive demand, develop high impact relationships. Those high impact relationships have to be trivial. And I think this department is an example of that. All the collaboration to write articles, to train the next generation of healthcare professionals. All of this will become a very important set of aspects that will elevate our brand. So brand elevation has to be a byproduct of very serious work. And in the Americas, we are approaching this in that way. But this is not new for Mayo Clinic. I think we have a long history of collaboration. If you remember, the Mayo brothers used to travel around the world. In fact, we got our name as the Mayo Clinic because they were going back and forth, sharing knowledge and learning and bringing new techniques to Mayo Clinic. And people used to call it the Mayo's Clinic. And this is why the name evolved to be the Mayo Clinic. So 1920, they were already participating in surgical societies in Peru. 1922 in Brazil. And this is the closest to my heart. You heard in my introduction that I'm from Mexico City. This is the bullfighting arena in Mexico City. And you will wonder what this has to do with the Mayo brothers. Well, you will recognize that face. I think I was reading the archives of Mayo Clinic, and that day, the bullfighter got hurt. Dr. Will Mayo operated on that bullfighter in Mexico City. And it becomes more interesting. The grandson of that surgeon that hosted the Mayo brothers came to Mayo Clinic Rochester in September, and we had dinner together. So this long tradition of collaboration and relationships, it is part of our DNA, and we have to continue. I think the mission and the vision that our founder fathers, envisioned for this organization. So our four aims, it is to pretty much hit, the world with very specific aspirations. And I will go quickly through what we're doing post-pandemic, because I think we learned that during the pandemic, everybody went back to zero. We were not even seeing patients. Patients were not even traveling. And we needed to reshape everything that we were doing. I remember having with Dr. Q and other physician leaders a weekly meeting to understand, are we seeing patients? Can we accept one patient at a time? So it was a very different environment. So in the Americas, Dr. George Pascual and I have the privilege to rethink what we're doing, and we put together a group that is pretty much bringing across the enterprise practice, education, and research. We know that there are multiple aspects of the work that we do that not only happens in international. This is, I think, the beauty of Mayo Clinic, a large decentralized organization that operates under a matrix environment. So we need to bring people together is pretty much our charge. But for this, we have to have clarity of what we want to do. And again, our first aim is to generate demand to our destination practices. We also have to provide oversight and support to some of the activities that we're doing to continue to engage with organizations outside the United States, and to serve as an institutional resource, to understand opportunities. As you know, Mayo Clinic does not lack of interest from people, but is that interest for the benefit of Mayo Clinic? Is that interest something that will advance our mission? And is that interest something that will translate into benefit for patients? We don't know. And for that, we need to take a very specific approach to it. So as we move in this spectrum, then there are larger opportunities that we need to evaluate. And for this, we need to have a very specific way to do activities. As we are aiming to have deeper relationships, we need to understand local environments such as legal frameworks, data protection laws, tax and compliance, and many other things. And you will see why this is very important. Through the pandemic, we learned that we were not seeing patients. And right before the pandemic, we did a market research study where we learned very specific things. Cultural competence was a key factor to drive demand to our destination practices. We also learned that there were very specific ways to engage with key stakeholders in multiple countries. Every country is different in Latin America, by the way. When we talk about the unstructured environment, multiply that by 10 or 20 sometimes, and that's the environment where we do business. So at the end of the day, we knew key drivers. People needed to know about Mayo Clinic. People needed to know about our cultural competence, and people wanted to be connected to our consultants, to our physicians. So this is why I think departments like this one have been very proactive in seeing growth, because the connectivity of physicians with physicians, it is the #1 key driver for referrals. And of course, after that, we have to make these connections in access to Mayo Clinic easier. So if you see, prior to the pandemic, we learned about this, we launched 4 offices, and then we needed to stop. And that was unfortunate because, the strategy that we were shaping was stopped for, force majeure circumstances. Now we are rebounding, and most recently,
Jose,
yes.
Can you pass right? Go back to that image, because I want to illustrate something about you and who you are. So up until 2013, 2016, when we came in September, Jose and myself and a lot of people, we already had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 offices in Latin America. But I just want you to pay attention to the growth that happened since then. More than double those numbers. And that was really directly attributed, in my opinion, to one person, which is Jose, which is his vision and his understanding of the Americas and Latin America. And I think that we're about to experience another tremendous amount of growth. And I see the faces of all our representatives in Latin America. They're all amazing. They're unbelievable the way that all of you, many of them are in this call today, are caring for patients. And I thank you and I congratulate you. And I thank you on behalf of our patients. So anyways, I just wanted to point that out. Thank you, Jose. Sorry.
Thank you. No, I think through our work at Mayo and together, we've seen very specific inflection points. And 2019 wasn't different. 2020, of course, wasn't different. 2021, it was the year where we rebounded. And 2022, we continue that trend. Most recently, we opened the Uruguay office last week. And for our colleagues to put this in perspective, this takes 4 to 6 months of preparations, legal reviews, compliance, internal committees. So it was amazing to do 4 in 1 year. And then after the pandemic, continue moving forward. But in terms of the inflection point, I just wanted to share here that our strategy is moving in the right direction. This is where we can see that 2021, from the year of the pandemic, we lost 47% of our volume across enterprise from the Americas, 22% of our revenue, and 23% of our net operating income. After those 2 years, once borders were open, we were ready. We were not thinking how to go about this. We knew that we had a tested strategy, and the stress test was passed, and our compound annual growth rate in terms of net operating income was in the 20s. I mean, that's growing our profits 23, 24% per year, but tremendous amount of volume, almost 60% growth in 1 year. And then the year after, which is last, 17%. And this, of course, didn't happen by chance. We were thinking about this throughout our strategy. And I want to point out that this results in our growth of offices, 100%. We grew 100% the number of offices. Our patient volume, 86% in the last 2 years. Our revenue growth is almost 70% the last 2 years, and our operating income almost 50% the last 2 years. Very important to point key drivers of this, which was Florida. Florida was the site that drove most of the growth and helped move these numbers up. And this volume was also accompanied by complexity. We are seeing more complex patients. When we look at the case mix index, it is moving really close to the fours, 3.5, 3.2, so across the 3 sites. So I think it's important to see that the pandemic has put a lot of stress in other health systems, and we are helping patients and other institutions be a friend, be a complement of the work that they need to be done. So consulting, we also, in the middle of the pandemic, we launched our consulting arm, and this is pretty much to share knowledge with other organizations. We did a project, we helped the Panama Clinic open, and this is a greenfield project. They came to us and they had an idea. So over a couple of years, we helped with the commissioning, staffing, and implementing systems there. We are also doing work in Brazil, and this is a large project. Grupo Santa is the 4th largest organization in Brazil. For the ones that are not familiar with Brazil, Brazil is a very complex environment, big health systems, but most recently we're seeing a consolidation of big systems and now moving into quality. So this is where partnerships with the Mayo Clinic make sense for us to help develop further their great systems that they have in place for quality and safety, but also develop more tertiary quaternary care capabilities. And of course, most of you have learned about our care network, which is a branded affiliation model. And in the Americas, we have only 2 care network members, one in Guadalajara, one in Mexico City. And the pandemic also put a test to that model because this requires ways to be done differently after the pandemic. And if you reflect, the pandemic put a lot of stress on health systems, and they need to evolve faster and quickly into being more resilient. So we are helping with some of those models. We needed to take a step back and look at the current model, see what was working, what wasn't working. And these were the 5 domains that we changed. And we changed them because health systems across the Americas wanted 2 very specific things: improve their clinical diagnostics and improve their complex care capabilities, most centered around cancer. So our first affiliation in cancer was launched with Medicasur. We're doing a lot of work, and this is Medicasur is not a new care network member. In fact, it was the first care network member internationally. They are consistently ranked as the #1 in Mexico, but that doesn't mean that there is work to be done. And the work that needs to happen is practice optimization, quality safety protocol sharing and implementation. And this is the day-to-day that we are having with them. This is a brief timeline of the work that is happening. More work is of course undergoing, but just to put a perspective, we are sharing our cancer protocols with them. And of course, this is not a one-to-one comparison, but this is where practice optimization and putting things into context makes sense. We are looking at quality assurance from the pathology perspective, from the imaging perspective, and also, very familiar to this group, we have a tumor board that we established for the practice of cancer by site. So this is moving in the right direction. It is gaining a lot of attention in Mexico, and of course across the enterprise, because as we aim to make these relationships through Shield, you can imagine that there is a lot of opportunity to expand our cancer collaborations here. Many work streams are evolving and happening, and of course, this is being promoted and communicated in Mexico City. So in summary, we found new ways to engage, to develop these high impact relationships. We developed a framework of collaboration centered around cancer, specifically to care network. And we develop a model for high impact relationships in practice and education. Our consulting is pretty much knowledge sharing of what we do and how we do it, which is learning our practice and teaching how we do it. So we still have to do work around the third shield, which is research. For this, we have chosen very specific countries, Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia. We know that they have very good health systems. So in some aspects, it's comparable to care in the US, but we know that even though they are very good, there's still a lag. They will have to catch up, and they're catching up fast. So this is where we see a very specific opportunity for us to collaborate with these countries at a deeper level in a more institutional way. We know that across Mayo Clinic, there are a lot of individual collaborations, but we have to put a framework for this to harness, the impact of research in our, for example, cancer designation as a center, and to also push forward our strategy of cure, connect, and transform. We have to connect. We have to develop new knowledge. So for that, this year we are doing a strategy refresh, and that will help us not only understand what the market needs, but also what the practice priorities are to bring them together. And these will have to, again, evolve into a collaborative framework that will help us push forward those collaborative aspects. And we will start with cancer, of course, because most of our work in consulting is happening in that area. So this is where we will have familiarity. But we know that onco, neuro, cardio, and transplant are the 4 key big areas of opportunity in Latin America, and we will continue to drive interest to those. And this, of course, we have to find a way to measure that impact, maybe through publications, maybe through funding, maybe just through having a number of relationships that are active in doing work. And the last aim, which is global brand, Dr. Q mentioned that in 2016, when we came to Mayo Clinic, we did a market research, and Hopkins was the number 1. In 2018, we did another study, and in some countries they were number 1, and in others we were number 1. So we were catching up. So more to come as the new market study is going to come in Q3. But one thing is very clear. I think our regional presence is the largest in Latin America through the offices and to the footprint of work that we're doing. So I will stop here, and I will just leave you with a couple of data points for reflection. Today, our media hits, meaning everything that our media team is doing in the world, 60% comes from Latin America, and we see emails every week about an interview here and there. And also, the fastest growing site for the Americas is Florida, which has driven more than 45% of the growth in volume and net operating income. So I think there is a very clear partnership. And the last item that I wanted to share is that today, the Americas has 55% of the total volume of the total international patients of the Mayo Clinic. So this is part of the work that we've been doing together. And I want to thank you, all of you, because all of you have been amazing partners and very responsive and very critical at the time, but also collaborated with us. And I think we are mutually understanding and developing better ways for Mayo to engage internationally. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jose. Beautiful talk and amazing reflection. Maybe kick it off with one. It might have come up in the conversation and the numbers, but for Mayo Clinic in Florida, just for our teams to get a sense of what it means to build an international practice. Because I think that the international practice goes beyond. I think that we can only do so much in tactics, as Jose and I, have talked over the years, and you've seen a lot of the illustration. You see it here this morning as to how every Monday and Friday we connect with people from all over the world, especially Latin America. But at the end of the day, it also requires the actual physicians to have an international presence. I think the one that is leading in our team right now vigorously and beautifully is JP, and we are taking advantage of his extraordinary energy as he continues to build an international practice. But just for people to get a sense, how much of the net operating income for the Mayo Clinic in Florida does the international office NOI account for, and then for the entire institution? Just give a sense, a rough estimate for our team.
Thank you. No, I think this is very, very important. The net operating income today for Mayo Clinic in Florida from international patients is close to 35%. 35%. So imagine your total year summarized in just a few patients. And I said a few, there are thousands, but I think it's important to put that in perspective. For the enterprise, it is close to 20. So, and this is again, a reflection of we're seeing more patients here, we're growing faster here in Florida, and we are more leveraged there. But I think it's also important that this speaks to one, I think the culture of the site that is more proactive in terms of reaching out, but also highlights an opportunity that if we were to do more, and we know through the market research that the connectivity of physician to physician internationally, this is where the referral is going to happen. And I think this site has been very, very proactive, and all of the sites, but I think we've seen here very important results.
I see some opportunities in some of the work that some of you guys are doing. And look at the Wake spine surgery that Kingsley's doing. Great opportunity for Kingsley to be involved in the Latin America, to be giving talks both in person and virtually. It takes a great deal of sacrifice and trips. And Jose and I, we have done so many trips in which we land in a country on a Sunday night. We spend all Monday working, and then Monday night we're back, and we're getting here, landing on Tuesday to do our work and our clinic and our surgeries and stuff like that. I see that also in people like Steve Parrish, who's leading an effort in the endoscopic spine surgery. And of course, JP is already modeling that with the work that he's doing in the simulation center. So great opportunities for many of you to participate and to enhance your work. I see, I'm going to go to Dave Miller, and I'm going to go then to Rodrigo. Dave first, and then you, Rodrigo. Go ahead, Dr. Miller.
Thank you. Listen, fantastic talk. And I could spend all day picking your brain. I'll try to hone down to one. But it's a lot of your data is really, really interesting. Obviously, so there's two main questions. One is, Mayo Clinic, part of the reason we're number one in so many places, and part of the reason we are respected is what we do is quality, and quality is something we try not to compromise on. But here in the States, we have a large portion of the population that we don't reach because of what it costs and what it costs to become involved with Mayo Clinic. And in Latin America and South America, those disparities are a little bit greater, and society is a little bit more stratified. Again, I'm not an expert, but from what I see. So I know that much of our business comes from this top sort of end of things. Yet, as an institution, we are very dedicated towards making as big an impact as we can for all people. How does that work? And then the second part of that question is it's very interesting that so much of our income is from a small number of international patients. That means that even with the affluence of the United States, we're not making money on most of the patients that come to see us, and they have more resources than many of the people in Latin America to access us. So how do we make the Mayo Clinic more relevant and more impactful to economies that don't have a broad amount of money when we're having trouble doing it here?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think it's to creating these frameworks that have to be systematic and resilient. I think this is where involvement and collaboration, not only from the international department to figure this out, I think at the end of the day, we have to have a very strong practice connectivity to work together. I can share a perspective that, as part of our mission, we have to educate. But we need the practice to help educate. So, and for the practice, to educate, they need to balance priorities in terms of, the local patient responsibilities and the international. So that is where we're going right now with this strategy refresh to create those models. I think we have had a couple of initiatives that have worked. We continue to learn, but not more needs to be done. But also, you know, we know that that's the international need. We need to learn more about the local practice need, because this is where probably we have an aim towards, you know, higher impact in terms of academic collaborations. And this is what we in international need to learn. So more to come on that. I think that's where we need to learn more and work together. One thing that I will say is that international here should be a resource to help figure this out, because we need to take into consideration local legalities and many other aspects that you know the practice should not figure out. And this is where we can work together.
And may I add, actually, and Dave, may I add also one important aspect that you mentioned is the cost of doing business, the cost of our services. I think also we need to redefine what cost means. We focus so much on the dollars, and I think that we have a misconception that the cost of care goes beyond the dollars. And it is true that when you look at one specific cost for an interaction with our service, people say, well, we are more expensive than Baptist or St. Vincent's or some of the other hospitals. But when you look at 100 patients, when you look at 1,000 patients, and that was actually one of the presentations that we submitted last night at the Congress of Neurological Surgeons with Diogo, in which we look at the cost of doing awake craniotomies. It turns out that if you do invest lots of money, because it's expensive to take care, put these teams together, but when you do over 60 cases a year and you begin to specialize, it turns out that over the long time, not only your outcomes are better, but you begin to save money for patients. And I think that we need to redefine what that means, because outcomes, how do you quantify outcomes? How do you put a price on the fact that outcomes are clearly, and you look, I have worked in amazing organizations, UCSF, Harvard, Mass General, Brigham, Hopkins, but at the end of the day, there's a reason why our outcomes are better. It's because of the culture that we have right here. And how do we put a price on that? I think that we need to redefine this concept. And I've been working and thinking with Jose, how do we tell a story in a way that makes sense? And the second point is that we do still make a significant amount of resources with our American patients, and especially with private insurance and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, also, how do we reduce the price of our services to be able to make income on other patients? We do actually, and it's a misconception that we don't, but we do. And I think that people have this misconception that our services are much more expensive than others. But when you look at outcomes, then you'll begin to see a complete shift. I want to pivot actually to Rodrigo before I have another comment from you. Rodrigo, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jose. That was a great presentation about numbers and amazing information for physicians. I have a question. Do you have any information, any strategies? I am trying to translate what you just described that you guys have implemented in terms of neuro-oncology that has worked great. Any way to kind of like do this in spine surgery? I think that this will apply for complex cases as well. So this will be kind of like the same situation will apply neuro-oncology and very complex spine cases. But what would be the strategies for us as physicians to improve the volume of cases of conventional cases? You know, how can we attract these patients, international patients, to come here just for regular procedures? You know, like more of these procedures that can be done anywhere. But how can we improve our volume here? Do you have any information about that? Any strategies that are developing?
Yes, I think as we see, the key drivers of patients traveling to the US, we see that it is diagnostics. There is this diagnostic odyssey that they go through because they go to specialists in other countries that unfortunately see less volume than us in areas of subspecialty. So there is always this journey that the patient is trying to figure out what they have. And then when they come to the Mayo Clinic, 40% of our patients come for a diagnostic, and 80% of them live with a new or a additional diagnosis. So, diagnostics is one key aspect. What you're describing is specific to, complex spine. I think we have an opportunity if we were to swim a little bit upstream to understand where these problems originate. Is it in pain medicine? Is it in orthopedics, in others? And this is the population that we need to tap, maybe connecting internationally with those physicians. Maybe this is where we should target talks to them, because they are seeing those patients before referring them to a subspecialist locally. And the subspecialists sometimes will be limited by the volume of patients that they see. So I think the opportunity is there.
Can I add something? Actually, Rodrigo is very modest. He's doing it already. He went already, did several talks in Mexico. Number one. Number two, you saw that he and Ian and Kingsley are coordinating the actual, first international spine conference that happened last week. I showed that on that. Number three, last year, in Mission Brain, Kingsley came in, did the first documented awake spine surgery with peribectal in Mexico City. We didn't do a press release. We have not capitalized on that information, Jose, and Paola was the one who made me aware a couple of weeks ago. So that's something that you and your outfit needs to figure out how to promote that as part of our Mayo Clinic network. I mentioned a few opportunities, awake spine surgery with Kingsley, doing more stuff in Latin America, and with Rodrigo. Number two, the endoscopic work that Steve Pierce is doing, promoting that. Number three, the artificial intelligence work that Rodrigo is already doing with our team, with Eric Mayer and some of the other group, Chris Fox doing extraordinarily amazing, complex and minimally invasive work, with Olu going into doing a spinal cord. So there's a way, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take, once again, I can count a year, the trips before the pandemic that Jose and I were doing. Almost every other week we were traveling Latin America, for a day or two, landing in this country, spending more time in the airplane than in the countries, just to give a talk, to meet a person, to go into the operating room, to interact with the leaders. But that's what it takes. I just want to make sure that people are not, there's no misconception of what it takes to build these practices. There's a lot of work. There was another comment by Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller, you wanted to say something again?
Yes, no. I mean, it is fascinating. What I worry about is, and I know that you, as you said, you mentioned the quality. To a certain extent, the quality takes money, and are we sort of banking on the rise of the middle class and the more affluent in Latin American countries, or do we think we can do this in this structure as it exists today? And the other is, I think that certainly it was mentioned that we have to rely on partners down there, and for the most part there are very good ones, but again, quality, maintaining quality takes money, and is the initial cost to entering in with Mayo Clinic a barrier that we have to lower to make this work.
Thank you. That's a very, very interesting point. So what I will say, number one, is that the region is changing. So I think we are seeing a growth in low and middle income class, which is pushing the boundaries of who has access to healthcare. And we are also seeing an increased penetration of healthcare insurance that has travel benefits. So I think it's a phenomenon that is happening, and we have to pay attention to it and capitalize it. On the other hand, as you well mentioned, we have to collaborate locally to help elevate local care. And those are the two aims of our strategy. So on the one hand, if a patient is going to leave their country and go somewhere else, we want them to come to the Mayo Clinic, and we are developing strategies to capture those patients and to also generate demand and to connect. On the other hand, for the ones that are staying, and we are seeing that the offer of local care is increasing, we have to develop a way for us to integrate into that phenomenon. And just as a perspective, I will tell you that 20 years ago, my very first project in private healthcare in Latin America was financed by the World Bank, and it took 6 months for them to put $500,000 into an institution in Mexico City. Today, the World Bank Bank has $6 billion in investments throughout the world, with the majority of them happening between Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East. So there are investments happening there. Is the number one, I would say, determinant of not being successful locally is quality, but it's not financing. So I think we know those two factors, and this is why we're pushing the boundaries at Mayo Clinic to develop these business units and these frameworks to have a local impact. And we are seeing good results, at least as of today, in Mexico, Colombia, in Panama, and Brazil. So there is more opportunity there.
So once again, I go back to the title of his talk, of course, the future of competition is collaboration. The world is changing. Our youth, our next generation, we understand how wealth is going to be passed on from generation to generation. That age between 25 and 40 years old is completely changing in the way they're communicating and the way they're interacting with each other, the way they're thinking. For medical tourism, they're going to look for an experience. And I think that this is where we excel, especially here at the Mayo Clinic in Florida. Unlike any of the other Mayo systems, and I love the Mayo system, but this is where we are obviously growing so vigorously. It also requires cultural competency. And I think about Marvesh, and I think Marvesh was here on the line, or may still be here. She's doing amazing studies. Try to understand, how do you interact with a patient from the Middle East that is different actually from a patient from Latin America? There are some similarities, but there are also some striking differences of what their expectations are and how to interact with them. And she's been leading some amazing efforts in that space, actually, in the operating room, outside of the operating room. So thank you, Jose. Beautiful talks, beautiful elements to consider. A lot of people stay here. That already, I saw Gabriel Vargas thinking about the Bucaramanga Mayo connection. I got a text from him. I saw already Rodrigo, who is already texting me. He wants to do a major mission in Mexico with the spine cases. He already has the connections to have all the materials donated, which can be quite costly, obviously. So I already gave him the green light for us to organize something like that with our colleagues with Mission Brain and stuff like that. So tremendous amount of work. You are in at heart, you're like me, a migrant farm worker. You planting seeds around the world, and that's exactly what you are. Different seeds, obviously, but it is interesting. Most people don't realize actually your humble beginnings, how you ended up coming to the United States, your extraordinary qualifications, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you're doing around the world to change the world. I'm proud of your roots. I'm proud of your heritage. I'm proud of knowing you and to call you my friend and to learn from you. So thank you for everything that you're doing. Thanks to the office. We look forward. We have a visit from all of the Latin American offices coming up pretty soon, and we are excited. I know that JP is also helping us coordinate a dinner with all of them, and we're going to break bread and hopefully have some mezcal.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you very much for the time today.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.